Good morning and welcome everybody to our 7th episode of Africa Talks. My IJP colleague Eka and I, we welcome you for this edition. Africa Talks is designed as a digital platform for exchange and African-European topics. Exchange of knowledge and ideas between journalists and experts from civil society from both continents. We want to learn, engage, and discuss about what are the impacts and consequences of COVID-19 pandemic. I'm Marco Wormer, and I'm member of the board of the International Journalist Programs. I would like to introduce Eka, my colleague, to you.
Good morning. My name is Eka Neumann. I'm the coordinator of the African program of the International Journalism Program, and I'm excited again to hear this week about and learn about African and European topics.
Our topic for today, agriculture and food security, how COVID-19 affects our access to food. COVID-19 pandemic movement restrictions have immense implications on food security, as you all know. Food supplies could also be massively disrupted, both nationally and globally, due to measures put in place to control the spread of COVID-19. The poor and marginalized across the world are one of the most vulnerable groups to any disasters. Meanwhile, certain agricultural regions were already in trouble when pandemic fears locked them down, especially in East and SubSaharan Africa. The number of people suffering from chronic hunger, estimated at well over 800 million before the crisis, could jump dramatically. How can adequate food supply be achieved? Which policies are needed to eradicate hunger? What works even in periodics of crisis? These and other questions we want to discuss with our distinguished experts today. First of all, we feel very honored that Renate Künast is with us. Renate studied social work at the University of Applied Sciences in Düsseldorf. Later, she studied law and graduated in 1985 with the second state examination. She's a lawyer now. She joined the Green Party in 1979 and has since then worked for the party in various functions. She was parliamentary party leader, and from 2001 till 2005, she worked as a federal minister of consumer protection, food and agriculture. After that, she worked for 8 years as a parliamentary party leader of the parliamentary group of Bündnis 90, the Greens. Since 2017, she has been a member of the German parliament. Dear Renate, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Nice to have the possibility to discuss with you.
So I would like to introduce to you Wambui Njeru. She's got a background as well in social works and community development. And she's got a postgraduate in project planning and marketing. She has worked in previous times with Action Now Kenya as a project manager, as well, and they're in the field of entrepreneurship and education. She's been a local director of the International Humanity Foundation, which focused on children and women. And in 2017, she's founded Here and Beyond Kenya, which is a community-based organization. Here and Beyond Kenya is a social enterprise that empowers rural women and youth in the Kerugoyo area, which is in the Mount Kenya region, approximately 120 kilometers away from Nairobi. So, and she is specialized, and the organization is specialized in supporting cottage manufacturing, agricultural processing, and there's a variety of projects, for example, agricultural processing skills training for women. So, welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here and looking forward to the discussion.
Our next panelist and guest is Federico Döhnert. He works as regional VAM officer. I'll be honest, I had to look about what is a VAM officer. This stands for Vulnerability Analysis and Mapping. And he works for the World Food Program. And you might know this, but I want to say it again. This year's Nobel Peace Prize has been awarded to the World Food Program, WFP, for its efforts to combat hunger and its contribution to bettering conditions for peace in conflict-affected areas. Again, from our side here, congratulations to that award. I think it is more than well deserved. Yeah, Federico has an expertise in vulnerability analysis and early warning, with a focus on food security and monitoring in conflict settings, resilience measurement, and as well as remote sensing and disaster risk modeling. He has worked in the West and Central African regions since 2014, first with the African Risk Capacity Initiative, and then with the World Food Programme. Federico holds an MA in Conflict Security and Development from King's College London, as well as master's degrees in political science and European studies from Sciences Po Lille in France and the University of Münster in Germany. Welcome to the show, Federico. Great to have you here.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Thank you for the invitation.
So I would like to introduce our next guest, Stig Tanzmann. He is a trained farmer and agricultural scientist. Since 2008, he has dealt with the international effects on European meat production, and further thematic focal points of his work are development effects of the EU agricultural policies, ecology, biodiversity, bioeconomy, and seeds. And since 2008, he's consultant with Brot für die Welt, Bread for the World, and for agricultural issues, and Brot für die Welt, who is a globally active development and relief organization of the Protestant churches in Germany, and he's there been since 2010. Thank you very much for being part of the show.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the possibility to discuss with you and share some of our knowledge. Thank you.
Before we start with Renate's input, I would like to introduce our graphic recorder, Wiebke, to all of you. Wiebke, are you there? Hello, good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Yes, I am here, and I'm ready to listen very carefully, and I have prepared a little template so that I can capture the main points of your discussion and the inputs of the panelists, and that will be provided afterwards on the website. So we have a go-to summary of all the discussions.
And in 60 minutes, we also will have a closer look on what you have captured so far. Furthermore, I will invite all of. Yeah, thank you, Wiebke. Furthermore, I will invite all of our participants to contribute to our discussion. You're more than welcome to enrich our talk with your questions and comments, and you can also leave a comment under our Facebook or YouTube stream. But now, Renate, the floor is yours, and please be aware that we would ask you to give your input within 5 minutes so that we get into the discussion as soon as possible.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to be invited. I see the watch here, so I stop at 5 minutes, wherever I am. So the idea of our discussion today is that we discuss about COVID and how did Corona change the world, but also what is the situation of food security, what can be compared between Europe, Germany, and Africa. And let me start with one point. One point I think is we are the same, that Corona has changed our daily world, and definitely not to a better situation. People die, poverty rises, we have the fear if our health system is still able to function for all the other illnesses or injuries. And I would say one thing there is different. In Germany, we don't have a steady fear for food, for example, because we've managed until now to have the supply. We have every vegetables or whatever we want. Maybe that could change if we have a lockdown where we come closer to in Germany in the moment, but we will not starve hunger. It's just a question if we get every food from everywhere in the world. So this is not a real problem. You see, what impresses me more is the point that we are on a, for my opinion, on a crossroad where the question is, where will we go in future? This is the point. And beside all this, getting enough food and having, protecting individual health and the health system, one of the most important points I think we are in front of in the moment now is to change the way we question about the food for the world. You see, in a lot of European or even German claims or meetings, the question is very often from the minister, the person who is now Minister for Agriculture, the question is very often, how do we feed the world? Can you imagine? In January, there will be maybe a Zoom meeting with international ministers and experts with the headline, how do we feed the world? I think this is wrong. The question should be, how does the world feed itself? This is the question. And this is, the decision on the crossroad to go to another street, because this changed the paradigm. You see, if we look at our situation now, we have started to have more discussion and a push, which is organized by Corona. The question is now, how do we behave compared to others in the world? Or the question is also, what is prosperity? We just are on the crossroad discussing, the Christian Democrats or others are saying, okay, the most important point is to keep our prosperity. People like me say, no, stop it. The question is, how after this Corona pandemic, how do we define prosperity? And what I say is, what is it, a bird or some child? I don't know. No, the question I think is now, what is our definition of prosperity after Corona? And we need a new definition. And I think that this is this is the point where we all together have to work on. If I compare conditions between Germany and African states, are we the same? No, we have the same possible situation. Look for food, look for health system, but the level we are playing on are, of course, the levels are different. Your problems in Africa are much bigger than ours. But on one point, we are together in one coin, being the two different sides of a coin. What do I mean? Europe is feeding itself with your arable land. That is the two sides of the coin. Our possibility to get in a shop in every minute, every fruit we want, to buy flowers how we want, you are the other side of the coin, because Europe degrades arable land in Africa as the farm where we produce vegetable fruits or flowers. This is a new form of, I would say, new colonialism. No military persons there, but you are, our garden for our food. And I think this is the crossroad. And at this point, we have to change the situation. And I just want to focus on 2 or 3 little points. The point now is, and I just, would offer you to be, ask more, even from an African perspective, ask more, Europe, what are you doing with your agricultural politics? Because in this moment, we are discussing between European Commission, Parliament, and the agricultural minister of all member states, we are discussing the common European agricultural policy. Can you imagine 60 billion euro every year we spend for agriculture, and the farm subsidies are still wrong. They have been greenwashed, but they are not green. And this is a point where we're really discussing how do we spend our subsidies in a way that we do not finance the mass of production, but social and ecological effects. Like keeping the soil, keeping biodiversity, doing something against the climate crisis. And I would ask you to ask for a change in Europe, I would say, don't degrade our land for your food and flowers only, and then push for export, and even with export of food, destroy African markets and possibilities of little African farmers to spend their money. 2 ideas, 2 theses. What are the solutions and what we should do now? I think we need more cooperation internationally, but between us and not between big agribusiness. And it's a way arguing against them. Two ideas I do have for this. We have to ask for a change of the paradigm and say, okay, on this crossroad, Corona showed us that we have to do a big change. The first point is that we question for build back better. We are spending a lot of money now to have the industry and factories and for jobs. And we should say, okay, spend the money under the headline, build back better. So strengthen regional value change the food strategy in the regions, do agroecology instead of agro-industry. And also, I think the word agroecology, you're all knowing, and strengthen social and ecological values in the prosperity definition. So build back better is one point. The second is we have to force them to build resilient cultivation systems, not these working with chemistry from year to year, from harvest to harvest, and we don't think about our children or so. No, we need to build up resilient cultivation system, which means diversity on the field, protection of soil and humus, water management, and priorities in water management. So my last sentence is, this crisis, as bad as it is, we have to use this crisis to change the way we are going to a real sustainable way. And this is the point that everyone in the world also can and have to use Germany and Europe to go for a change. That was, I think, 6 minutes.
Ika?
Yes, thank you, Renate. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure hearing those interesting insights from you. And we would like to hear Wambui right now. Wambui, please, your input for the next 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Eka. As we know, agriculture is the biggest employer in Africa. Approximately 70% of people living in Africa rely heavily on agriculture and farming. However, with the pandemic, the COVID-19, this has greatly been challenged. When COVID hit, most African governments put in restrictions of movement. We had curfews, meaning less working hours and less marketing hours. For our farmers, they were not able to access the markets. Most markets were closed, restaurants were closed, hotels were closed, schools were closed, and these are the source of farmers' market for their produce. The farmers were not also able to access the inputs, basically because there was little or no movement to where they can source the inputs. Meaning, we in Africa, in Kenya specifically, we had issues with the supply of farm inputs, farm products, and being able to source for fresh farm produce, both for the rural population and the urban population. I have to say, with the COVID-19, Africa has been greatly affected. And we have, at this point in time, we have to think of the way forward. Post-COVID, what is it that we can do to make sure that the value chain doesn't break, where people cannot access food and farmers cannot access the markets? I'll go to my point on our post-COVID way forward. One, agriculture has not embraced innovation and mechanization in Africa, and specifically, I'll talk of rural Kenya. With innovation and mechanization, we will be assured of higher productivity and resilience in the farming arena. Meaning, we will produce more and we will maximize the use of our farms. Number two, I would recommend that the government invest in agriculture fully and with goodwill. This would mean that the government would subsidize, for example, the farm inputs, the production, the distribution of farm products, and the distribution of the farm inputs. If I talk in the case for Kenya, the government has not been very active in subsidizing the inputs that the farmers use for their farming. This, as a result, would mean that the farm produce are expensive, and in return, this affects the affordability of the produce. With the COVID-19, most Kenyans, for example, lost their source of income, lost their jobs, and those who remained working, there were pay cuts, and that people could not afford a meal. Or if you could afford, then some would skip one meal in a day, or reduce the rations for a meal. Therefore, the government has to ensure that they have invested heavily in agriculture, view it as a business, increase innovation in the same, whereby the youths will also be interested in being part of the agriculture and the farming and the whole value chain. If agriculture is modernized, we will realize that in the case of Kenya today, women bear the load of farming. Most farms, it is the women who are working there. But if we modernize, if we use innovation, then the youth would also be interested in the farming. Again, the food markets are poorly developed in Africa and in Kenya. Infrastructure poorly developed. No investment is put into it, and therefore, even once the production of the farming is done, farmers are not able to access the markets. We have poor roads, we have poor communication avenues, and if more input is put in the technology and the infrastructure, then we will be one foot ahead. To come to a close, majority of the rural households are also they also survive in buying the same things that they produce. Therefore, when the government invests on urban markets, the rural markets are left on their own. Therefore, we find that even with the COVID-19, the rural poor suffered more than the urban poor, because the government, when the government put the restrictions, they also allowed a few foodstuffs to the urban areas, leaving the markets in the rural areas closed. Therefore, post-COVID, I would call for mechanization of agriculture, diversification of crops. In the agriculture in Africa, most countries rely on only one crop. But if we went organic way, if we went, we incorporated crops that are resilient to climatical changes, then we would be safer in terms of food security. Thank you.
Thank you, Wambui, for your thoughts. And Federico, now it's your turn.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. So, Marco, you mentioned earlier that you had to look up what RAM or VAM stands for. So just to give you a little bit of context, the Vulnerability Analysis and Mapping Unit in the...
Sorry, the quality is not so good. And if you speak fast, I'm not following.
Okay, sorry. I will speak very slowly then. I hope that the connection is all right. So I just wanted to give a bit of context of the work that we do in the VAM unit, so Vulnerability analysis and mapping. Essentially, we're responsible for assessing needs across the region, in this case, West and Central Africa, understanding patterns of food insecurity, and advising WFP and partners on where, why, and how to respond. So, as Michael mentioned in his introduction, there are several 100 million people that are chronically food insecure, so that go to bed hungry every day. We estimate that that's about 9% of the world's population. And more worryingly, this number has been increasing since 2014 and is expected to grow even further over the next 10 years. But when we look also at acute food insecurity, so really people that are in crisis and require urgent assistance, that number is also extremely worrying. So before the crisis, there were around 135 million people across the world that were acutely food insecure. And this number is going to increase probably. And WFP projected at the beginning of the crisis that this figure could double due to COVID. In the region that I work on in West and Central Africa, we have just finalized 2 weeks ago updated regional food security analysis, which we've done with governments and regional institutions and partners. And the results suggest that right now, already, 19 million people are acutely food insecure in West and Central Africa. That's 80% more than last year. But if we go towards next summer, that figure is going to go up even further to about 26 million. So if we think about what drives that, what are the reasons behind this food insecurity, there are obviously, it's very complex and there are many underlying layers, including systemic factors like poverty and inequality, as well as more acute, like drivers of acute food insecurity, such as conflicts, weather events, and economic crises, right, which also have a massive influence on food security. And that's also where the COVID-19 pandemic comes in, particularly through its socioeconomic impacts, both at the macro level on economies, but also at the micro level on people's incomes, on communities, on market prices, access to food, trade flows. And it's also important to note that due to the COVID-19 crisis, people that were previously maybe a little bit less exposed to food insecurity, such as urban populations, are now even more affected. There are also, if we look at more macroeconomic factors, we've just conducted an analysis with ECOWAS, Economic Community of West African States, and that analysis suggests that, including also due to COVID-19, economic growth will be affected in the region, and the region might enter a recession in 2020. So those factors obviously will continue to deepen the underlying vulnerabilities that affect food security. So we need to think about all of that when we talk about solutions or when we talk about the way forward, and about how to construct and build systems that can, on the one hand, respond to shocks quickly, to protect the most vulnerable when there is a sudden crisis, but also when we look at how to build resilience to shocks, like in a more sustainable way, right? So we have to make sure that communities can adapt to changes in weather patterns, that they're less exposed to negative impacts of climate shocks or other shocks like the COVID crisis. And I think that this pandemic has really brought that to light, and so that we need to look about how to create sustainable solutions that on one hand are able to respond to certain shocks, but at the other time also make sure that we build longer term resilience and sustainability that can last. Okay, I'm done. I kept my 5 minutes, even a little bit shorter. So over to you. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Federico. Thank you. Stig, it's your turn now, and we would be happy to hear for your perspective. Please, the next 5 minutes are yours.
Yes, thank you. Like I said, like you introduced myself, I work for Bread for the World. I work there in the policy department on agriculture matters. So I work on a global perspective on agriculture, but of course we have a lot of partners in the African region. So I would like to share some insights, but also coming from a general perspective. As Bread for the World and as our partners, we always work with the human right to food. This is at the center of our work. So we very much look at the Committee on World Food Security in Rome and their replies to the COVID pandemic. And I would advise everyone to read the CFS high-level panel of expert COVID report, which was released in October. I think it's a very, very interesting document in showing what political steps do we need to take. Also in the African context, it is an analysis of what has been happening and what kind of political steps need to be taken. And we would advise, especially in Africa, for civil society to lobby that this report needs to be presented and discussed at the next CFS in February, because this is the highest body dealing with food security issues. But also we have a lot of partner organizations that work on own analysis, and especially when I read the introduction, also looking at Mozambique and Zimbabwe. We have just a partner organization, the African Center for Biodiversity. They just published yesterday a paper on Mozambique and on Zimbabwe, how they have been hit by the cyclones Idea and Kenneth, and how it all ended up or led up also to the COVID pandemic. I think we have to see that Africa is hit by more and more different crises, and that is something where we differ a lot between Europe. I mean, in Africa you have so many other issues that you need to deal with. And I think that is also what we need to recognize and need to analyze, that they have to face multiple crises all the time at the same time. And that is why some of the things are even worse. Regarding what we see from our partners is that, like some others said already, the most marginalized, they have been hit the most in the countryside and in the towns or in the mega slums that we have seen. The curfews there have been very, very dramatic, did push people into hunger, and the people don't have a voice. This is also one of the major points of this HLPE report that I was speaking about. We need better agency of the people that are voiceless at the moment. And that are the people that are working in the informal market. A curfew meant, especially for rural areas, that farmers could not market their products because informal markets were closed. Supermarkets have been opened, but supermarkets are not where people are getting their food from in Africa. This is a major difference. And also it meant that like local cooking places have been closed, like informal restaurants have been closed. A lot of people in the slums, they don't have the money to buy gasoline or whatever to cook. They're not used to cook. They're used to buy the fresh food or their fresh prepared food on the streets. And that are things that are very, very harmful. And that is where we see also a lot of crisis reaction, especially from the north, went into a wrong direction and has been taken up by some African governments, focusing on long value chains, focusing on agribusiness, and focusing on getting supermarket and agribusiness chains running, instead of focusing on what is feeding our people and what is our economic basis. And the economic basis is the rural farming sector and informal markets for feeding the people, not supermarket and long chains. And I think they will really need to work on. And yes, we have to speak about innovation, how to support better farmers. But there we also see a big push by agribusiness to focus on what works for them and not on what works for the small farmers. So I would be very, very careful to call for higher farm input subsidy programs, because we have seen with our partners that these are working majorly for agribusiness, large multinational companies, and not for local farmers. So we call for agroecology and different support systems by the local governments that really focus on what is on the ground, what does work, and what does not work. So we did publish in summer a big study on the Alliance for the Green Revolution in Africa, which basically wants to repeat what we have done wrong here in Europe. And we found very bad results. The things that they try to implement and that they are pushing to be further implemented now with the COVID crisis did not work and did not reach most of the farmers. So we need also in Africa a very strong debate on what agricultural system and what nutrition system we want and what food system we want. And there we need more money, but we also have, like Renate Künast said, to speak about which way forward, which system we want and which system does reach the people, the working people and the eating people, and who are the benefiters and who are not the benefiters. So there is a lot happening. Looking at some countries, they have also a lot of crisis problems, like Nigeria being first closing the markets, then having floods, now having also in harvest time a lot of violence. I mean, they have hundreds of people being killed trying to harvest crops in the recent weeks. So this is also something very, very dramatic that we are seeing. Thank you.
Thank you, Stig, and thank you all of you for your very valuable inputs here. When I'm listening carefully to all of you, I think most of the solutions, most of the recipes are already on the table. And I would like to ask the politician in our round, Renate, why is it so difficult to implement what all of you have said so far? Where do you see, where are the restrictions? Where are the barriers? Why is it so slow to get progress here?
Thank you for your question. I just want to say it's not a question of being slow or fast. It's a question of the change of the system. The old lobby is still looking at, they are still looking and focusing on an industry-based agricultural system, which says we use the seeds and the fertilizers and pesticides of 3 or 4 of the biggest enterprises in the whole world, from Bayer Monsanto to DuPont and so on, and China and so on. It's 4. It's now 4 of the biggest, which share the possibilities for profit with seeds, treating seeds with chemicals, with the patents, with the fertilizers and the pesticides, and they already started to keep the finger on digitalization, which means they have the software, they have the machines, they have the data, and so they will be the ones knowing everything about climate, weather, soil, water, and all these things, and do new business with all this. And you see, this is a question of lobbying. If we are on the crossroads and want to have a change, the change of the system, they are lobbying not to change. And this is our biggest problem. So we are in confrontation of 2 ways. This is why I said we are on a crossroad now. And if not now, when should we focus on the point even the other speakers mentioned, to change the system? Look at the rural possibilities and chances, look at the possibility how people can feed themselves. And I think this is the duty of every government and parliament to organize this. And maybe this is the year and the time, or these are the years where we have really to become angry and discuss and say, let us change this, because this crisis is a bit like taking the blanket over all of this away, the blanket that does not show everyone how the things belong to each other, how we, for example, export high processed food to Africa that are in the supermarkets now, but the most of the people in Africa and African states cannot afford these supermarket food, and even if they can afford, they are getting thick and getting the special illnesses like adipositas and so on, the bad things of a luxury white man's life. This is our point where we have, we have to get angry and said the post-COVID world has to look different. And I think it's also what we have to ask the different countries in the world if they help to rebuild what in Africa. We have to say, okay, the first point is push our governments or your governments to feed the people in rural areas, for example. And we also have to ask for international money to be able to build up these systems in a good way. And I think this is for me, this is the only way to ask the question, which system do we want?
Thank you. And I would bring this question again to the others in the round, because when it comes to systemic change, from my point of view, I think, how could we incentivize? What can we give as incentives for governments to change these kind of systematic of systems and of organizing their agriculture? Maybe Federico or Stig and Wambui also. Maybe you could give us your thoughts on that idea. How can we incentivize like governments to change their system?
Wambui, do you want to go first? Or
yeah, go ahead.
Yes, Wambui, you can go first.
In terms of governance, I am shy to say that I am not comfortable to say that our system works. For example, from where I sit, corruption is the rule of the day. So even if our government today received some inputs, some money from European nations, I wouldn't say it will have so much of an impact on the ground. Therefore, like the previous participant has said, it is time to shout loudly for a change of system before we even go to the solutions in the farms, in the trade, and in the markets. Our government at the moment will not impact agriculture on the ground, food security on the ground. It will not. We have a pandemic of corruption. So from where I sit, I'm shy to say we must first change the system. Thank you.
Thank you. Should I can
yes, please.
Thank you. I think that maybe to give also an example from Niger, where I actually worked before coming here to Dakar, and also how the work that we did there has also then been picked up by the government, or has been done in collaboration with the government. WHP does a lot of resilience work in Niger. What does that mean? It means that it's about creating sustainable systems at the local level, right? Making sure that there are kind of like integrated solutions about like building sustainable livelihoods, making sure that there are sustainable education systems in place, nutrition systems, etc. And one of the things that we focus on a lot is to build climate resilient agricultural systems, or really at the local scale, using self-produced and organic fertilizer, for instance, working with water harvesting techniques, etc. And the idea really is that will help, as Renate said in the very beginning, like we need to see what we can do to make sure that the world can feed itself, right? And those programs are actually very successful, and the government is very supportive of that and is actually looking to reproduce that in other parts of the country. So there are solutions that we can look at, even like really localized solutions, working on sustainable agricultural systems, but even going beyond food production and looking at what else needs to come in to make sure that we help create resilient communities in the long run, and how we can leverage partnerships with governments, but also with other actors at the local level to make sure that that happens. Right. Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yes, please. Renate.
Yes.
Renate, may I?
Renate.
Okay.
No,
okay.
can I have quite something to say on this as well. Just so for Bread for the World, we see it on different perspectives. So especially on lobbying or having access to governments. It is getting very difficult. It's getting worse with the COVID pandemic because you cannot gather, you cannot protest, and a lot of international negotiations are only happening in a digital space. That means the voices of our partners, the voices of ourselves are not heard anymore. And we're going back to a time maybe as in the 80s or in the 90s where only industrial lobbyists have a very close access to governments, and they can push for their policies, what helps for them. And we even see it in Germany. I mean, all the meat industry, all the big processors, I mean, they declare themselves as systemic relevant and block all the reforms that we need in the agricultural sector. And that is happening globally. And that is what we see as a big concern, that we are going backwards, because the people most affected by hunger and malnutrition, they are not here anymore in international negotiations and not by the governments, because they cannot raise their voices. They have very much problems to be part in such a digital conference like we're having now, because they either don't have the equipment or there is no air power, there's not enough money to buy it, or even electricity is a problem. And I would also say we have a lot of different options at the table at the moment, but there is a massive fight about which options are being taken, and the sustainable actions or possibilities, they are driven backwards. That is as least what we are seeing at the moment in international negotiations. It's very concerning what we see there, and it is very necessary, like what was described by the previous speakers, what we of course do as Bread for the World, which is our bread and butter work, building local working systems. So this is why we focus on agroecology, which means work with what you have. Don't rely on external inputs. We're trying really to set up local seed banks with local traditional seeds, with also locally improved seeds, so that seeds do not need to be bought on international market or shipped or transported over far-reaching areas. But what we have seen is that due to industry lobbying, also in Africa, we have a lot of seed laws already, or seed marketing laws, that do discriminate these practices. And this is what we need. We would need locally improved seeds that can be shared and marketed by farmers and all of it. So there is a big push, a big fight. And also what is not recognized, I think, also in this debate in Germany is, although there is the COVID pandemic in Africa, there have been a lot of local elections, a lot of national government elections, and a lot of times COVID was used to have these people who have been in power to stay in power, because they could suppress certain things, because then gathering of people was not possible. So this is one thing. And also about global solidarity. I mean, it's a shame what we're seeing now. We're discussing now about agriculture, but what is about the whole vaccination debate? I mean, I don't see any solidarity within the German government at all. I mean, it's always Germany first with any developed country first with getting the vaccination, and not really pushing for an international agreement who gets the vaccination, who gets the support. So we have a lot to change with our own government and also with African governments, that things can work. But that's also, again, stressing the HLPE report on COVID. This is what agency means, building local communities that they can elect good local leaders and influence and change politics and policies on this way, because their voices is being heard. And that is something that we also don't have. All these farm workers here, they're also not here. All these people working in the European slaughterhouses or in the European vegetable sector, that are coming from all over the world and are working under very, very dramatic, poor conditions. That is a global problem that we're having, and we are closing our eyes for it. Yeah. Or it is blocked in Parliament. Thank you.
Thank you, Stig. Renate, you wanted to add something on the discussion?
I fully agree with my previous speaker. This is what, for example, I said it's a new form of colonialismus. Can anyone speak this word in English for me?
Colonialism.
Colonialism.
Colonialism. It's a question of concentration, speaking it. You see, what I have in my head is that maybe we all should think about a way to make these voices heard, which don't have access to this lobby structures and digitalized lobby structures we have now in this time of pandemic. Maybe it is an idea that people that want to have a change, dealing with the different issues in and around Africa, and I mean African persons and people from outside, to write a paper or a manifest or something like that, focusing on the question, what does the situation, this pandemic mean for Africa? And to focus on the situation of the crossroad and what are we asking for? Because I see that we also have a deficit of debate. How do we spend, for example, money, or ministries, international money is spent on the situation on Africa? Very often we have the situation, we, like flying in, dropping food out and say, okay, we have been very careful and so social or so on, but we have to change the system. And it is, of course, it is difficult, because we are also in times where international interest from Europe to China is on arable land, or Arabic states the interest is on arable land and soil for feeding their people somewhere outside and giving them something. Maybe it's an idea to come somehow together in these times and write a paper, manifest or whatever, to focus on especially these points. And I say it because yesterday in our parliament meeting, there was again and again, we have to work on our prosperity. This is the most important. And we have to be champion in export. They are discussing being champion in export Africa or others are just allowed to have the raw materials and not the real benefit of processing things or something like that. I think we need, if people cannot raise their voice, their own, we have to organize it.
Thank you very much. Wambui, would you want to
Sorry,
add something?
I will have to leave you because I have to rush for another digital meeting.
Okay, thank you, Stig.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all, and goodbye.
Thank you very much for being part. Thank you. So, Wambui, there was, Renate touched on organizing people on the ground. Have you got solutions to all those questions, getting those voiceless people get their voices out? Could you share something with us quickly?
Okay. In our small way, we've been able to organize the rural women and youth to be able to take part in small-scale manufacturing, that is agricultural processing mainly. This has been done mainly by the locals without the input of the government. So far, we can say it has a small impact in its own way, meaning once we are able to do the small-scale agricultural processing, we evade from post-harvest losses. We are able to create jobs, and we are able to earn a living. We still have a long way to go because, like somebody said before, this is a new phenomenon. It's a new a space. People have not been empowered enough to be able to embrace small-scale manufacturing in their own capacity. We are always looking up to the top, to the people on top, the big manufacturers, the big processors, but we are reaching out. It's a step that we know it will have an impact. It's a step that will take time and resources, but it is impactful. Currently, from where I sit, we have 4 different women groups and youth groups who are doing avocado oil processing, macadamia oil processing. We have fermentation of cabbages, because at the moment we have a big harvest of the same. We have another group doing tomato pulping, and with the processing, we are sure we have extended the shelf life of the products. We are able to access these products when there is no harvests. The only thing is that we have to continue preaching the gospel. We have to continue empowering women and youth in the rural areas to take up the work, be able to do the production in their small way, without having to look at our government or any help from out there. So far, so good.
Yeah. Thank you, Wambui.
Okay, so I take from that, thank you very much. I just take from that, in order to make changes, we need to change awareness. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, Marco.
Yeah, one quick last question to Federico, and maybe also to Renate before we sum the talk up. Yesterday, I think the CEO of World Food Program, David Beasley, he has been quoted in a German newspaper, in a weekly newspaper, that he wants to ask the super rich, the billionaires worldwide, to help in the fight against hunger. I'm not sure, is that desperation, or is it really a good and really a new innovative step to really bring money and to try to really foster solutions here, or to bring out solutions to fight this problem? What would you say, Federico?
I mean, I think it's an interesting it's an interesting solution, right? Obviously, there is a lot of philanthropic work that is already being done, yeah, I think that it is important to create alliances also, like where they might like to identify also like new funding sources, how we can bring together people that would normally not necessarily work together, right? I mean, if from a perspective of an organization like WFP, which is mostly funded by governments, it is also important to look at like what other sources of funding there are, right? And I mean, but also beyond WFP, it would be important to make sure that we have like common discourse, and like that we're aligned on like what can everyone do, right? What can governments do? What can communities do? What can the super rich do as well to contribute to working together towards this idea of having a world that can be more sustainable and can feed itself. Yeah.
Renate, what do you think from this idea?
I just remembered the sentence. I cannot quote it really in English. You know, it's the question of, do you just give someone who is hungry a fish, or do you learn him to do fishing and help him to build up fishing with a boat and all the materials you do need? So it's nice to and okay for this day and for tomorrow to ask the super rich to spend money for feeding people that are actually hungry and don't have access to food in a different way. But it does not change the structure. And when I, for example, look at Bill Gates Foundation and so on, he's spending a lot of money, but he is not really the one who's changing the structure so that rural development and knowledge about agroecology and the management and how to deal with all this question, and about how to build up regional markets between countries, and focus on little regions, that does not change the system. So let us not be confused by this so impressive action. Oh, someone is giving $1 million or $1 billion. It's always about the structure. How is the world feeding itself? How are the people feeding itself? With food sovereignty, with their seeds, with management, with their possibilities to have farming, processing, rural markets, and so on. I don't think that the result and the solution is that 10 billion people over the globe are eating 4 vegetables owned by 4 big companies. And it's not only against these companies, it's also the question to have resilient systems. And because it's not only about how to feed people in this COVID or post-COVID, it's also how to build up resilient systems. It does not make sense to destroy fertile ground by a lot of chemical stuff. We have to go to the knowledge how we keep the good soil and biodiversity, and that is where we depend on to be able to feed ourselves wherever we live for the next decades. And so nice to have some money, but it's all about the structure. And I'm convinced it's the structure and how the big subsidies and rules are going.
Ika?
Yes, thank you very much. So should we have a look at Wiebke and look what she has been doing in the meantime and what she grasped from our talk so far?
Oops. I think for some reason the signal is not.
We hear you.
Okay.
Yes,
we hear you, but you can tell us you grasp, and then
only an empty image. You don't see what I've done.
Yeah, that's okay. That you tell us. Tell us what you grasp, and then we look at it later.
Sure. So the main themes that I picked up on are the first of all, I really liked the question to change the question from how can we feed the world to how does the world feed itself. Thanks for that. That was really enlightening. And from there to look at what we, first of all, the differences in Germany and in Africa. Obviously, we're all affected by COVID and the lockdown and the global supply chains. However, in Africa, the situation is a lot more serious because there's multiple crises, and there is a massive increase in acute food insecurity already now. It's already been rising, and it is expected to rise even more. And therefore, the question really is, what can we do to not only address the crisis on the short term, but also make sure that the new colonialism that Germany is still kind of practicing stops, and we focus on a long-term strategy of agroecology with soil protection, with water management, with investment in infrastructure and resilient crops, and also supporting the most vulnerable that don't have a voice right now to get access to government, because at the moment it seems it's only the big players that have a lobby, and to start shifting from a focus on those long and global supply chains to a more local sustainability and local focus, because the people in Africa right now who are at risk are not having access to where the money goes, where the investment goes, where the help from the different organization goes. And it's nice to have, I also heard it's nice to have input from the rich and, you know, have money, but it's not gonna address the structural problem. And that's what we need to do right now.
Wiebke, maybe you refresh again maybe you refresh your image again so that we see the whole picture. You can do this during we say what we will have next week, and give a thank you to all of our panelists. But Eka, first, it's your turn.
Yes, thank you very much for your this summary. And yes, what I take away from this week is, first of all, food and agriculture is highly political. That's no surprise, but it was a re-emphasis on that's really a very political issue, and that that the chances which we all have to change the system, it starts with individuals and change of awareness and creating opportunities where locally produced food is a key factor of how we live, how our agricultural system and is going to be in the future, and how we create livelihood for ourselves and for others on the global planet. So I learned today that it's got a lot of things to do with the daily choices we make in buying agricultural products and accessing agricultural food. So thank you very much for this very interesting insight. And next week we will come with the episode where we deal with arts and culture and the impact of COVID-19 on the arts and cultural sector. So we are very excited to see you again for next week's episode.
Yeah, and I will add one last sentence, because we have the refreshed picture now. Maybe we can show it so that you all have an impression. Maybe we can share it with our audience, that we will show what Wiebke did so far, because here is the full picture. Thank you to our director, our technical director. You see, there is a lot of insight, and we cannot go into that in detail, but you will find that graphic record on our website, IJP, www.ijp.org. So we will get into that. I would really like to thank all our panelists. I would give a big hand to Wambui, to Renate, and to Federico, I really appreciate that you all spent your time with us and shared your ideas. And I hope that we see our audiences. We had more than or almost 500 people watching via Facebook and YouTube, which is a good number for our talk. So thank you for your inputs here, and stay healthy and take care, and goodbye.
Yes, and also thanks to Stig, who has had to leave already. Thank you. Thank you very much.